7:09 p.m. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm excited to get underway with our discussions about the budget. I should actually just ask you all, did you perhaps get the time to review the documents that I sent prior? Okay.
A cursory manner. Yeah, it's a lot to absorb.
Okay. So I wanted to send those documents because I realized that there's a lot of, I guess, just questions about what really is this process about, really how does it work within the committee. I'm not sure if perhaps folks might have heard a bit more about it at the past general meeting. I spoke with Eleazar this past week because I want to try and start making sure we got these items in on time. So essentially, every year we're expected to provide the City of New York with a number of budget items that we think are of interest to us. Every community board does this throughout the City of New York. We have had in the past, and if you look at the document I sent over, we had roughly about 5 items that were added to the list for expenses on this committee, and then in capital, we had about 6 items. And that's just to give you the essentially brief overview of what we had originally put last year. If you saw in the documents that were sent over, both within the Statement of District Needs Assessment as well as the City Budget Register, there was essentially a more in-depth look at what was the entire board's listings last year, right? So I guess what we should first go through is really just the Statement of District Needs Assessment. It was the 3rd item sent. Does everyone have those documents?
Okay. I only have the spreadsheet you sent, like the Google Doc that you sent with a capital and expense. Was there a 3rd?
In the email that was sent out.
The one on the 25th? I was just looking at it.
Yeah.
On the 25th?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's titled October 2020 Housing and Human Services Meeting Agenda. There's a couple of attachments.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now that everyone has it, I guess what I should really do is go through the introduction here, really just giving a brief overview. The annual statement of community district needs and community board budget requests are charter mandates that form an integral part of the city's budget process. Together, they are intended to support communities in their ongoing consultations with city agencies, elected officials, and other key stakeholders, and influence more informed decision-making on a broad range of local planning and budget priorities. This report also provides a valuable public resource for neighborhood planning and research purposes, and may be used by a variety of audiences seeking information about New York City's diverse communities. If you go, I think it's the next page down, actually just want to get the right page. It's page 5, page 6 on the PDF reader. You'll see that every year they'll give this kind of breakdown of our community's profile, giving kind of the highlights as to what we think, what we've at least found in regards to some of the demographics. You'll find the makeup of really a lot of zoning being included here, or at least what is most of the blocks being zoned for, in addition to also a population breakdown. And typically what they'll do on every report is they'll list what the top 3 pressing issues are. You'll see that they give a bit of a kind of description about each one. And it usually tends to be based off of really what happens in the voting of the individual items for both capital and expense, which we'll get to in a moment. So I should note, again, this has not been the most updated, right? We have information that was based off really the 2010 census for some of the things that have to deal with the population and density. Of course, now we're in the middle of having the 2020 census being done, and of course, that's going to potentially look a bit quite different. But based on the information that was previously had, and I think it also includes some information from the American Community Survey, we had seen within Manhattan's CD12 district, there was 45% of households that had previously been reporting they were spending 35% or more of their income on rent. Across Manhattan, this was 37%. New York City was 45%. The mean commute to work was roughly about 41, pretty much keeping in line with the rest of the entire city. We found that amongst our population here, there was limited English proficiency. It specifically states that 37% of residents 5 years or older have limited English proficiency. This is actually double the rate that is in Manhattan, and quite a bit larger than what's New York City's rate of 23%. Of course, it'd be rude of me to not mention access to parks. Thankfully, we've been doing well in regards to creating that sort of accessibility. There's 100% of residents living within walking distance. Of course, there has been a lot of discussion within Parks Committee about how you can even expand parks even further. A lot of folks have been trying. I think the last project we had been discussing was about one of these park projects that was supposed to be focused on around the Dyckman houses. I'm not sure if that came to fruition, but I'd love to potentially hear more about it. With regards to our crime rate, it states that Manhattan CD 12 had 9.3 major felonies reported per 1,000 residents or per capita in 2017. This seems to be a bit lower than Manhattan, and actually, yeah, and good portion from New York City. The educational attainment, it shows that Manhattan CD12's district, there was 33% of residents 25 years or older who had already earned a bachelor's degree or higher. This, in comparison to Manhattan, appears to be roughly about a half of that amount. Manhattan is 61%. Across New York City, it is roughly 37%. So within Community District 12, it appears that we're quite a bit lower. And the unemployment rate, again, this is a much different time period from where we are now, but at the time it had been reporting that Manhattan CD12 had been at about 6.8% of an unemployment rate. That was the average between 2013 to 2017. In Manhattan, this was lower at 4.2%, 4.9% for New York City. And lastly, the New York City poverty measure shows that within Manhattan CD12, we had 20% of residents having incomes below what is the poverty threshold in New York City. I should note that for New York State, we have a different poverty threshold, right? This is at 200% of what is the federal. So, depending on really how you're looking at these statistics, it can vary. And yeah, Manhattan was 14%. Across New York City, this was 20%. And on page 7, you're kind of seeing that in-depth look of really where you're finding the zoning or the appropriate buildings being placed in each portion of the district. For the overview statement of the community district, really, I think I can spare everyone, not go through the entire paragraph, unless you'd like to spend some time going through it now. But I think it's going over quite a bit of information that is captured from a lot of the demographic, essentially surveys, the census, and kind of goes into some of even the information that we might collect from the city at different points. For the top 3 pressing issues overall, the portion that I was mentioning prior, you'll see that they specifically list affordable housing at the very highest. The second is land use trends, and the third is schools. I should just go through just the affordable housing section for everyone's own perusal. We receive many complaints from residents and small businesses indicating that their rents are too high and their landlords are harassing them in multiple ways. For the foregoing reasons, CB12M Manhattan recommend the city to increase funding for mandatory right to counsel for anyone who is rent burdened, pays 50% of their income in rent, and also increase funding for legal representation in court. CB12 of Manhattan also requests that permanent long-term affordable housing construction build a high number of these apartments or housing units with immediate priority being given to nonprofit organizations and community land trusts that are partnered with nonprofit developers. Emphasis should be given to 100% affordable housing based on the community's AMI. I'm actually just kind of going along with what's been a huge discussion with the inward zoning. I'll mention the land use trends. Our district is facing a rezoning proposal made by the city of New York, and a rezoning application for the Inwood section of the district that has been submitted to the Department of City Planning. CB12 of Manhattan requests that the Department of City Planning should dedicate additional planning staff to work with CB12M and local residents to formulate and implement a contextual zoning plan for Washington Heights and Inwood, and to provide technical assistance to CB12M and local residents to evaluate the Inwood rezoning proposal, including the draft and final environmental impact statement. So
I think that this item, request for a dedicated person from or urban planner from the borough president, if I'm not mistaken, this item is actually sitting on the land use committee request. But Ebenezer, do you know if land use is? I'm almost positive it is. I always ask for like a dedicated person from the borough president. So I think we have to check with them and not duplicate efforts, because land use housing have more items than land use does. So I don't think that we should duplicate the effort. Just it's a waste of a line item.
Yeah. So just to be clear, so I was just reading over it, given that kind of really the concern with zoning has to deal with a lot of the concerns that we have about high rents.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that has been an item that is, yes, you were right, part of the land use committee's individual items that they've presented in the past. I can assume that now that the Manhattan Borough President has provided that planning, or the staff planner, that might very well potentially change. But yeah, it's just so that everyone is aware.
Mm-hmm.
Also, hi everybody. This is Aisha. Generally, what we do is, if there's a line item that housing agrees on, and then we find, because like in this instance, land use is meeting after us, if we find that they have already put it on as their line item, sometimes we'll collapse them into one at the budget meeting. Or if there are things that are specific to land use, we might split the item down the middle depending on like how it falls. So just to add that as context.
Yeah. Thank you, Aisha.
Can you explain this, what Aisha just said about the budget meeting? Is that the executive committee collates all this?
So every year, the board is going to be having a budget meeting. It's really an opportunity for both the public and as well the community board to spend time talking about what has been of interest to them. I have personally not been aware as to when the exact date is going to be for this year, but I'm definitely checking in right now.
Is that separate from the general meeting at the end of the month?
Yes,
I mean, typically, yes.
it
Thank you.
is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Even though I think last year we did do it in one meeting. I don't personally prefer it. I think that the budget deserves its own time and space. But I think for the last 2 years, we've been collapsing it into the general.
Yeah. A lot of boards across the city, they handle their business differently, but generally a lot of boards, they'll do it individually. It'll be one event specifically. Typically at a school, they'll invite the public, right? But of course, we'll have to plan out something with a different kind of medium this year.
We can do it in a park. Why not?
With
Yeah.
megaphones, everybody will have a megaphone.
Oh my, that'd be interesting.
A question about item number 1 on the capital expense. Well, capital, you know what I mean. The first one, there were like 2 buildings, I think. I thought both already got renovated and now they are designated as affordable housing. Am I correct about that? I thought there was another. Am I correct about that? Is it still, this item is still open?
Are you talking about 2110 Arden and
Amsterdam Avenue.
yeah. Last I knew, they definitely started work on both projects. But what's been happening consistently is, even though it's stated that the money is going to be given, it hasn't been sufficient. And that's the reason why we've continued to carry it, in order to make sure that the necessary funding is allotted throughout the course of the project. So we would have to get an update from Martin Collins to see if that's finalized.
Because if it did, then it's a continuous support.
Right.
It's not going to fall under a number.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So we are kind of saving one.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Martin Collins is the best person to get update for that.
Yeah. And I should also mention,
Text them.
previously we spoke with Maria Lizardo. She was involved on at least one of the 2 projects. I think it would also be good just to catch up with her.
Yeah, she was involved in the Arden project.
But before I go down to the individual items, I also want to go through the human services end, because the following page, or rather page 9, page 10 on the PDF reader, it goes through some of the items. This kind of has to go through what Aisha was just mentioning, that sometimes committees will also collapse certain items. So previously, I'll just mention, we had a few items that were focused on mental health services. I think in last year's conversations, we had put forward some particular items that were focused on increased funding for mental health services. And I think that it actually ended up getting picked up by
Health and environment.
So yeah, I just want to just let folks at least read through what was the summary last year. For mental health and substance abuse treatment and prevention programs, under that section there, it reads, in the expense budget priorities for fiscal year 2021, the most important issue for healthcare and human services is to expand mental health services in the community, including crisis intervention and acute care for persons with severe mental illness. It is also important for CB12M, or rather Manhattan, to increase services to prevent and treat chronic diseases such as Alzheimer's, diabetes, cancer, and heart disease, provide funding to ensure that all local public schools have health clinics. It is relevant for CB12 of Manhattan. Noise complaints have incremented considerable in our community. For this reason, we request an increase of staff that conduct regular noise enforcement, air quality monitoring, and water quality testing in our communities.
Yeah, all of that is health and environment.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I mean, I mean, with mental health, and also not to mention a lot of the organizations that work on those very services, it kind of gets to the point where it's a mixture, right? Because you also have to bring in staff that are dedicated in certain fields, not to mention with individuals that might have particular needs, it could very much so vary. So yeah, so that's just been typically one of the areas in which that you know, both the Housing Human Services Committee as well as the Health and Environment Committee kind of overlap. Last year we had an item that was brought forward by the committee, but was also kind of collapsed into one of the Health and Environment Committee's items. So I just wanted to make note of it for everyone here. Yes, Bruce.
So Martin just texted me back. He said both are under rehab at this time. NMIC NIMIC will operate 21 Arden, and Cloth will administer 2110 Amsterdam.
Wow.
That's from the front lines.
Well, thank you for reaching out, and yeah, that's incredible. We'll definitely have to, I think, follow
Martin's
up.
been at it for like 4 years that I can recall. Aisha will probably correct me. It's even longer than that.
It's
It's
definitely
longer than that. I think
like 10 years at this point.
Wait, 10 years?
10 years
Holy shit,
with
excuse me.
families that had a right to return.
Yeah.
okay.
I'll also continue, and this might be something I'm going to try and draft a little bit more this coming year. Under the section there for needs for homeless, we have a homeless shelter in our district in need of funding and more services. It is still a matter unresolved. Yeah, I will definitely change that portion there. I think there's a lot more to be said there.
What do you mean you will change it? Like how so? Like,
We need to address really a lot of the concerns that has to deal with the homeless shelters, but particularly, yes, the services being offered to those that are homeless.
okay.
Two sentences did not address that.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Okay, got it. Yeah, I agree. And I think that should be like, where is it on the list in terms of priority?
Do we have
Yes.
the grid showing what the vote was?
Yeah.
Oh,
So I sent a link. I don't know if perhaps you might have saw. It's a link to a document.
You said it at the beginning of the meeting, right?
Yeah. So it's just so that you see the individual items there. And actually, let me just confirm if there is. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure. There are attendees. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen once we get up to the individual items. I think we should. Yeah, I think we're fine now. So I'm going to start sharing my screen so that the public members or members of the public can also see. Yes, Janet. Yeah, so that's why I'm going to share my screen so you're all able to see. And just for those that are from the public watching, the reason why this document gets sent out specifically amongst the members of the committee is because this is where we individually put our rankings. So this document doesn't, individually get shared with the members of the public, right? Because we don't, these are our ranks. We don't want people to just simply be changing them. So I'm going to share the screen now for everyone to be able to see. Okay. So is everyone seeing my screen right now?
yep.
Okay. Great. Actually, just adjusting it here. So if you pretty much continue going through the document, really you see each one of these items here, both between capital and then expense. if you'd like, you can definitely take a moment now just to begin looking through what is that for both the Housing Human Services Committee as well as others. I've basically compiled those items that had previously been selected for our committee last year. And beside them, I placed their individual rankings. What I'll say is that, as you saw, and you've heard already previously, we've asked for the renovations of 2110 Amsterdam Avenue. And it's odd actually that we don't have the other building. I think, and this might have to be something I have to talk with Chris Martin, or sorry,
Martin Collins?
Martin Collins, yes. This is probably something I'll have to confirm with him, why we might have taken off 21 Arden. It might have very well been because Maria had said last year that I think they got the funding, but I'll just try and confirm.
This is why I saw this item. I'm thinking, wait a minute, wasn't it already completed? Because I remember there was something on one of the newspapers talking about one of the buildings that open up.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm not 100% sure. So clearly Martin, or I don't know if somebody else have more information about that.
Yeah. It might very well be. If I'm remembering correctly, I think Maria had said that they got it. And so last year it had previously been CS, but when we spoke to Martin, 2110 had still not been. And he showed us a bunch of photos, I think. And Aisha, please remind me if perhaps this could have changed, but I thought Martin showed us photos that it was still all boarded up, that it hadn't been having any construction being done at the last time.
Yeah, the last time I saw it, it definitely still had scaffolding on it. So, and that's specific to 2110 Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Bruce, can you ask Martin Collins about the Arden?
Well, I just did it. And he said both are in rehab. So I'll ask him again specifically if you want.
For Arden specifically, if the building was open and
or specifically, was it given the appropriate funding so that the construction could be done?
I think that's probably, I suggest it's better an offline conversation with him because it may be complicated, but his text was both are under rehab at this time, meaning 21 Arden and 2110 Amsterdam. So I'll ask, huh?
Sorry.
I'll ask him for an update via email. How's that sound?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I guess for the purposes to move forward in the meeting, we could basically say, I would assume that we would all be on the same page as far as making sure that this is brought through to completion. So if it's not completely funded, if there's any shortfall, can we agree that we would want that to be funded?
Okay.
And then if it's done and it doesn't need funding, then it drops off.
right, and then number 2 become number 1, number 3 become number 2, and so forth, right?
Oh well, these are just the rankings from last year that you're seeing but right beside them.
I understand that, but we're ranking all of them today,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, well,
If you want an answer right now, I'll try to get the best I can from him.
So this is the thing. In previous years, what we've allowed folks to do is because some have essentially stated that they'd like to have their own opportunity to rank the items individually. What we've done is we've given them that time outside the meeting, and we've given a deadline. But if you all feel comfortable ranking the items today, right in this meeting, that's of course completely okay. But I would just note, however, that because we want to try and hear back from Martin Collins, it might very well just be helpful to at least keep that sort of availability there. And once we've been able to hear from Martin, then I can also just establish when we want to have our deadline already set to complete our ranking.
So do you know what tracking number that is? So what I was saying in the last meeting is generally what we would do is have the tracking numbers so that we can easily have the city's response right next to the item when we're considering, so that we know what they said about why it was or wasn't, or how it was funded. And we could just like see the line item straight across and figure out, versus having to keep going back and forth. But if you know the tracking code, that way I can go straight to it.
Yeah. So I mean, I didn't put the item number on this document. We can input it as we're discussing it, but I just wanted to go through just what the items were right now, going through the statement of district needs document, and then switching on over to the register.
You know what it is for that item?
Uh,
I'm just trying to find it.
so it's on page 815. I'm just trying to. Yeah, 312202-101.
Okay, sorry, interruption.
Yeah.
Martin says, remove both buildings from budget priorities because both buildings are fully funded.
Awesome.
Yeah, perfect. Great.
Yay! Yay!
Finally, right?
So I'll go ahead and just remove this line item for tonight. Okay.
And Martin knows the budgeting process fully well because he was chair of the board years ago. And to me, his word is golden. So I trust whatever he says.
Wow. Thank you, Martin. I'll also just go through the other items you have here. So we had, and this was ranked number 2 by the entire board, permanent long-term affordable housing construction, building a higher number of 100% affordable units based on community AMI, with immediate priority given to nonprofit organizations and community land trusts / land banks that are partnered with nonprofit developers. So for this item, I'll actually just mention, I was thinking it over the past week, given really the concerns that were brought forward by both Curtis with the introduction of Intro 2050, which focuses on expanding what's the current bill that allows for people to have essentially right to counsel and also an attorney be provided for housing court matters. And it kind of goes through 2022. The bill that was introduced, and this was introduced by Mark Levine, it specifically seeks to ensure that this is going to occur immediately, rather than having that wait until the fiscal year, I think 2023 at that point. So with that in mind, I was actually going to say, would anyone essentially prefer that we kept this individual item as it is and then create a second line item focused on that bill that's Intro 2050? Or would perhaps people prefer that we change the wording of this item so as to kind of include that very intent of the bill? And I'm sorry if perhaps maybe folks have not seen it. I can actually just pull it up. I'll stop sharing on my end and pull it up.
I'm sorry, I missed the context of what you said the bill encompassed. What is it? Permanent.
So the bill, let me just pull it up. Sorry. I struggle with multitasking at the same time.
Danielle, but isn't that covered in this spreadsheet? Isn't it covered in the second tab under expenses, the first line item? Or at least part of that?
So let's see. You said the expense item here: increased funding for legal representation in court in all zip codes, not currently covered in CD 12. Okay.
I don't know if you were proposing to move that to the capital side, or if that was the proposal, but it seems to at least some format of what we were just discussing is in the line item for the expense.
Yes, yes. I'm mixing those two items up, but yeah, this would, yeah. So that intro 2050 would yes correspond to this item actually. Yeah, sorry, I was clearly mixing those two items there. But so it might, yeah. So we can return to that item, but so sorry, mixing those two up.
Okay.
Yeah, but actually, just because I'm discussing it and I pulled up the page, I might as well just show everyone the bill. Also, I feel like at some point I do want to go over Legistar just so everyone can essentially learn about using it. Okay, here we go. Got it. Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, so this was a bill fairly recently introduced at the end of August. Pretty much as it states in its name, providing legal services for tenants who are subject to eviction proceedings. It's a local law to amend the administrative code of the city of New York in relation to providing these services. And it pretty much just goes into saying that the bill would amend local law number 136 of 2017, the Housing Court Right to Counsel law, by requiring the immediate implementation of access to legal services for tenants facing eviction proceedings in housing court citywide. And I can actually just open the bill. Stop sharing so everyone can also see the document. Okay, so this is the bill. essentially starting from section 26-1302. It's stating, subject to appropriation, the coordinator shall establish a program to provide access to legal services for covered individuals in covered proceedings in housing court and ensure that no later than July 31st, 2022, that was the previous date given, effective immediately is what it's been changed to. All covered individuals receive access to brief legal assistance no later than their first scheduled appearance in a covered proceeding in housing court or as soon thereafter as is practicable. And all income eligible individuals receive access to full legal representation no later than their first scheduled appearance in a covered proceeding in housing court or as soon thereafter as is practicable. And kind of just goes into establishing a number of different, I guess, caveats for the bill in which certain things would apply. And it's just really ensuring that this is effective immediately. I should note that what was the previous agreement across the entire city, it did not necessarily, I guess, strive in every sense to ensure that every family was covered. There was essentially capping by which every family had to abide by, where it was, let's just say for a family of 4, if your income was 50,000, you're right on the line for whether or not you could receive those very services. And if you were to have succeeded or rather exceeded that line, then you might not necessarily be eligible for various services. So, this is kind of going into the weeds of what happened previously with the bill that at least has been responsible for ensuring these services were made available. But we had put forward a item that was specifically focused on ensuring that that cap was increased, so that it's not necessarily meeting that 200%. Specifically in that very item in expenses, you'll see that we had asked for it to be increased to 300%. Does everyone understand what I'm saying there? I'll just take it as a yes. So yeah, so that was just, yeah, Bruce?
Yes.
Are you?
I can't raise my hand virtually. Okay. I'm doing it physically.
Gotcha. Yeah, what was your, what were you gonna say?
No, you asked if
Give
we
an
agreed,
agreement.
and I said yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. I am seeing from a member of the public, Janet, asking what is a covered person? And that was a 4-person family income limit. So we can look this up, but it should still stay at roughly what it was last time, which was 200% of the federal poverty threshold. So like I was mentioning, it's pretty much just it's capped very low in comparison to what a lot of families across New York City might make. And especially, I think there was concern from, correct me if I was wrong, Aisha, you mentioned last time about the $15 minimum wage and how it really affects families' ability to fall into that 200% of the poverty threshold. But yeah, that was kind of the reasons why previously we had been mentioning that.
Adia, can I add something to this? So yeah. My understanding is that covered person would pertain to zip code, because not every zip code has the right to counsel. Although I will, a small caveat right now, during the pandemic, pretty much all zip codes are covered just right now during the pandemic. But right before, you have certain zip codes And if you've lived in one of those, then you were a covered person. So you were entitled to at least have a conversation. That's why it says brief. It doesn't say brief representation, so I think brief advice or something like that, because you can meet with an attorney and just discuss your case. The next step would be income eligibility, and that would be for full legal representation. So just because you live in a zip code, if you're over income, then you don't actually qualify for full legal representation. So my understanding is that we're seeking to increase that threshold so more people qualify for the full legal representation, and they're not out just because they barely, made the income eligibility. Is that a good summary?
Yeah.
What the cover person is? Because I think Janet was asking about a cover person, and there's like a distinction between covered person and then income eligible persons. Like you have to meet both to get a full legal representation.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and there's it's changed from the very beginning, right? Because this was roughly about 2015 when really just what was the covered areas were presented by the city of New York to what was, I guess, that contractual deal with LAS and Lisney and Boom and all the other providers. But yeah, there was a number of items that we would kind of go over with individual tenants, so as to request, both that information of their income as well as their household size and what zip codes they lived in. That has, since changed quite a bit, I'm sure. But yes, I think the item that we were focusing on previously in regards to expense was to ensure that people had attorneys if ever they, have a housing court issue arise. But yeah, that's I think if perhaps do you maybe feel that the wording of that expense item needs to go further? Is that what I'm understanding?
Let me see. You just have this law. That's fine. And all zip codes not currently covered. Okay. My internet is unstable, so hopefully you can still hear me. No, I think this is pretty clear.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, Aisha, were you also going to say something or?
No, I was just, are we doing expense or we're doing capital?
Yeah, we're going to go back to capital, but I just wanted to bring up that bill just because I realized that I didn't have everyone in the know of what exactly the bill I was referring to. But yeah, so that was just my sort of brief explanation about that very bill.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, that was just the explanation of the bill that we're discussing, and that Ada had brought up as well previously. So yeah, that was my long way of going out to discuss the bill. But going back to the capital items, yes. So we had the permanent long-term affordable housing construction, building a higher number of 100% affordable units with immediate priority given to nonprofit organizations and community land trusts / land banks. The second item was funding for supportive housing construction for LGBTQ youth. I'll just mention that the reason why we had discussed this, and actually, sorry, let me go back and share my screen so the public can see as well.
Can I start ranking on your spreadsheet, or are we going to do the ranking like?
We're going to do the ranking once we've been able to establish all the items.
Okay.
Just because if perhaps people want to introduce any new items, I want that opportunity to be given so that they can also be ranked.
All right.
So yeah, that very item that I was just mentioning was funding for supportive housing construction for LGBTQ youth. This was ranked 4th out of 48 items across the entire board. So we did quite well. Then we have provide funding to construct affordable, accessible housing for seniors. This is ranked 5th out of the 48 items. We have additional funding for AEP and PPP program for preservation and rehabilitation of distressed buildings in CD12M. We noted it was immediate priority It was ranked 6 out of 48. I should note for folks that might not have been as familiar, this so AEP and PPP, those were referring to programs that specifically are doing either enforcement or specifically the kind of rehabilitation that might be needed through HPD, the city's Housing Preservation and Development Agency. And then the last item is provide more housing for at-risk and transitioning individuals. I noticed I wrote that twice, individuals and families. And this was ranked 10th out of 48 items. Any questions, thoughts about those 5 line items I've gone through thus far? Okay. And I guess just to add on to the next section here, are there any new items that perhaps anyone might want to add in? If not, it's perfectly fine. If perhaps those very items are what you think is most important to have at this time, that's perfectly fine. But I just want to give anyone the opportunity to introduce new items that might have caught their interest, whether it be throughout really what's been the past few months or something just a personal interest.
In the previous year, I believe we had discussed providing Wi-Fi in public locations for people to be able to access the internet when they're doing their business, especially in the human services areas where people are spending hours, sometimes the entire day, in those spaces, and oftentimes need to communicate in order to handle the things that they need to handle. So, but it didn't get re-entered when Barbara was doing the budget last year. So I would request that be re-added back for discussion.
And I'm sorry, just to use the appropriate language, what was it exactly? You said provide?
To provide internet access, Wi-Fi in the public spaces, like at the welfare center, the Social Security. We learned that that's not specifically in our purview, but what we were supposed to do was to communicate with our elected officials about being able to address that in those areas. But basically figure out what are the spaces like the welfare office, where that type of support can be provided to basically have internet when people are in waiting rooms.
Gotcha. And just so as to know, I'm noting it specifically as HRA service centers. This is kind of just because of the changing culture what we have in DSSS. Those are no longer referred to as welfare centers.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just noting as so. Okay. Is there anything else that might come to mind here that might serve as a capital expense?
To expand it beyond the service centers, why not all? Because there's also shelters. Why not all spaces that are governed under HRA, DSS, where people might have a need for that.
Yeah, sorry. So when inputting provide internet access in publicly available spaces, I meant to be, including of all, but I just want to note specifically including HRA service centers.
Yes.
Is that wording fine, or are you suggesting?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't only focusing on the service centers, but like.
Gotcha. Okay, so then that should be fine. Any other additional items?
Hi, Ariel. This is Marielle. Just a question of clarification, and this is coming from someone who's a little bit newer to these types of conversations and terms. So I just want to make sure that my understanding is correct. When we look at item or row 6, provide more housing for at-risk and transitioning individuals and families. Does the term at risk also include those who are homeless, or does at risk mean those who are on the verge of becoming homeless?
Yeah, both.
Okay,
So
that's what I thought, but I wanted to ask.
No, yeah, that's actually yeah, very good question. The reason why we worded it as at risk was because within at the time, right, and there's still a changing kind of universe, both the language and also the culture at city agencies. But at the time, at risk was referring to both those that either are without a home as well as those that might very well be seeking out services because they're very much so likely to be displaced. So yeah, so that's just the kind of terminology that's been used. And transitioning is also another sort of terminology, word or a different way of saying the very same thing.
Okay, that's what I thought, but again, just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so that are there any additional going once, going twice? Maybe say 3 times.
I'm looking over the list that I read in regards to priorities, just to see if there's anything there that has a funding need.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think a program, remember I was talking about blighted buildings as well as buildings that have outdated electrical systems and the risk that it causes for fires, that I had spoken to the fire department and DOB about. Basically right now, the way that the law is, landlords with buildings that are older than a certain date are not required to upgrade it the way that a new landlord would have to implement certain systems to make sure that they are fireproof, or at least less likely to have fires. What about funding? Because the discussion that I had with DOB was related to the fact that it would cost the landlords with older buildings money in order to upgrade to a newer system. What about a program that would provide funding for them to do so?
Yeah.
Does Con Ed do something like that?
Not to my knowledge. It's my understanding is pretty much that if a building is a certain age, that there's no requirement and there's nothing. I was actually looking for it myself because, like, for instance, in my bedroom, there's one outlet. And up until very recently, most of the outlets were only the 2-pronged, not the 3-pronged outlets as well. Some of them were actually, they're all updated now as of recently.
Good, because that was the issue with 775 Riverside, which had the 6-alarm fire 3 years ago.
Exactly.
And Pinnacle walked away unscathed. So that's a good question. How do you be preemptive in the beginning? Because they had not done fire stopping in the dumbwaiters, and that was part of the cause that the fire shot up to the roof.
Right.
Yeah.
I There was another one also on Riverside that had a daisy chaining issue, where they had plugged surge protectors and extenders one after the other and caused a fire. So
I think that item would serve as an expense item, and I can include it here as the providing of, or rather providing for the creation of a fund to aid in
upgrading electrical systems to
Inspecting, basically inspecting. First, you need an inspection report to say that there's a problem, and then you have to deal with it.
I would even go as far as asking to, it's not going to happen, right? We can always write it, to outlaw the, the 99 cents extension cord. Those things cause fire. There was a fire in 50 something street, like that was maybe 3-4 years ago. And somebody died.
yeah.
And especially a holiday is coming. Well, it's not really an expense here. But I was just thinking about it. But
I think giving money for buildings to have an inspector come in at least is the very least we can do to identify a problem, and separate and apart from the landlord, who's never going to do anything to inspect their own buildings.
So I'll also just note, and yeah, as I was hearing your thoughts there, Bruce, about the inspection and also really having inspectors, I was also thinking about this line item here on row 5. So this is also to try and aid in that very effort, because yeah, that was one of the things that we were discussing quite a bit in previous years for, I think it was 2018. But yeah, there's a specific need to have more inspectors, not just specific to really just any individual buildings or to really any individual community. It's just in general. The city doesn't really have that many inspectors, and they kind of operate with a very understaffed kind of office across really just all of HPD.
Well, the challenge is who's going to call the inspector, because after the fire, the fire inspector said, "Oh, that we couldn't find an apparent cause." Well, people in the building, one of whom works in our building, said, "Oh, they rewired the building years ago, and they basically put wires down the dumbwaiter shaft. BX cable, it wasn't protected, it wasn't closed off. They didn't fire stop between the floors. I mean, it was just a travesty." And Pinnacle basically just scathed away with their attorneys and got through the court because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So is it that you think that there needs to be some, like, a different line item that might not necessarily fit with funding for HPD housing code violation inspectors?
Well, I don't know. What is HPD doing about inspecting these buildings? This is a condo conversion. So, you have 70% rent stabilized tenants, and you have 30% condo owners. And then you have a building that goes on fire, and who's at fault? It's the landlord, because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And how do you prove it? You can't. It's hard after the fact.
So I think, and that, so in the essence of conversion, that's dealing more so with Department of Buildings. And it's odd because I'm actually thinking about it now, and again, it's been some time, but Aisha, correct me if I'm wrong. I thought this very item was not just solely specific to HPD. I thought it included DOB originally.
Yeah, it did. I was actually looking at that myself just now. I'm not sure why it doesn't include DOB.
Yeah,
So that's a good point. That's a focus for somebody who should be doing an inspection, which they didn't do in this case, or they did and it got swept under the rug. I don't know why. was a hellacious fire and people were displaced for 2 years and it was tough going back. And now they're back and they're still having a lawsuit against Pinnacle, the landlord, the sponsor.
So I've changed it now so as to include both. Rather, let me actually just change it so the wording is appropriate.
Ariel, I have a question. I wonder if there's something that we could do around just informing tenants of what housing code violations are. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to do it, or like to create a fund for some kind of work like that, or if that could take the form of some kind of awareness event. Just kind of throwing it out there.
You have my my deepest concerns and shared interest there. So this is kind of going to, let's see, this is line item, both line
okay, yeah.
3, and I thought we had a different one as well, but yeah, this is kind of line item 3. So I say this with both respect and also a desire to better things there.
Mhm.
So the city of New York, up until about roughly what it was, 2015, 2016, more so 2015, but they had not been involved in that kind of work. This came about with the introduction of the public engagement unit. I used to work within that unit when it first started, and they kind of had the responsibility there within what was a subunit called the tenant support unit, to go out to the individual communities and specifically inform as well as educate, as well as case manage a number of housing code violations that were found in certain communities. And we also kind of got thrown into a number of other projects, but we also partnered alongside LAS, LISNY, and really a number of other service provider organizations that were contracted so as to really assist the tenants from being displaced, and also help them deal with various a lot of holdover cases, let's just say, that might have arisen because a landlord could have made all sorts of accusations about tenants, right? That could potentially then leave them without being given the right to stay in their homes. But yeah, the tenant support specialists, they've done that kind of work. When I was within that unit, they were specifically designated to go throughout the zip codes that were contracted for legal services to be given by LAS, LISNY, and a number of other service providers. And that work, it does mean a lot to a lot of families. That was probably the reason why we wanted to also add in that item with the additional mention of funding initiatives to inform and educate tenants of their rights, because of course there's a number of other organizations that do that great work. CASA is one of them in the Bronx. The Right to Counsel, they came up more recently, but they're also doing that kind of work. So yeah, if perhaps there's maybe any additional items that you think could be added as well to aid in that effort, yeah, I'd definitely be happy to hear.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think I kind of glanced over and didn't catch that point there. But I guess this just brings me to another question, and I realize we're already kind of late into the evening. How specific do these need to be?
The descriptions of the line items, or
yes, the descriptions.
I don't think we need to get into too much depth. Is there I guess a concern about the wording, or perhaps changing it?
No, not a concern about the wording. It was just kind of more so for my own knowledge. I was just wondering if there's we need to be super granular, so really when they see it, they really understand what it is that we're trying to get across, or if it's okay, kind of putting, the ballpark idea of this is what we would like to see in the community.
Yeah, previously
I think it really depends on the issue. For example, the two buildings, on the one in Amsterdam and Arden, those are very specific.
Correct.
So there is no like rules one way or the other. It kind of more depend on the issue.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
The other thing is we are limited in the amount that we can put in each line item. So
What do you mean?
sometimes we gotta. You mean this is for the ranking, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a limit to the amount of characters that you're gonna actually end up seeing. So we usually have to try to be creative in how we're giving detail, but within the limitations of those amount of characters.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the, I guess in the desire to not go through all community boards of the city of New York and read each and every individual one's items, and not have them be so in depth. I think that's the the kind of thinking there behind it. But yeah, if perhaps the any item might drag past that kind of character limit, that would just be something that I could quickly edit so to kind of shrink that down a bit. But you'll see, so for instance, the first line item there of the increasing funding for legal representation, I mean, that's like the largest item we have here, and that was previously okay to fit in. So I think we're doing good here. Is there any additional items that was thought could be added for expenses? If not, I'm of course, again, happy to leave it there. And because now we're clear actually that the original line item for capital has already been taken care of, we can leave these items up, and I'll actually just get rid of the blank spaces so as to ensure everyone can feel free to rank them in their own time. Is that okay for everyone else here?
Can we rank them right now?
I mean, yeah, if you'd prefer to, of course. But it's of course, again, completely up to everyone here. Although I will request, so because today, let's see, today is the 1st,
Mm-hmm.
we should hear back from the staff about setting up a budget meeting. I do want to kind of leave the deadline open right now and just email everyone as to when they have to have that line item submitted, or just the rankings on the line item submitted. Yeah, I'm gonna get back to talking with Eleazar and also the staff just so that we can get a date in which we're gonna have all committees submit their rankings. And yeah, I guess we can continue from there. But of course, again, I'll just update everyone about it. Yeah. Is there any questions on that? Thoughts? Okay. I'll also just mention Janet sent a note. I think she was asking whether or not to increase or raise the eligibility income to include lower middle class. I think I might have already answered that, but yes, it was to essentially increase the eligibility by income. Your specific question about lower middle class, I think 300% could very well include that, but I'm not sure as to classes in the instance you might be referring to. So I hope that answered your question. So that is then tonight's main items. With that, I am happy to open it up to new business. Did anyone have any announcements? I will also just take this time to mention to everyone, I'm not sure if everyone has seen, but there's been an extension of the moratorium on evictions for the time being. So that's meaning that if folks have had, for whatever reason, a lot of the concern about not being able to pay their rent, being essentially evicted, that's supposed to be held off for the majority, not all, I will say. But for the majority of people, this will be held off until the new year. As I mentioned prior, there's loopholes that are always being just taken advantage of by landlords. I think that there's going to need to be at some point a discussion about what those loopholes look like. But I'll also just mention as well for everyone here that kind of going along with the emails that I was sending out for members of the public, just so you can also know now, I'm looking to set up a essentially town hall event in the form of Zoom, bringing forward. I believe it was a deputy commissioner that would be coming from the Department of Youth and Community Development, in addition to reaching out to a few different partner organizations, such as the Coalition for the Homeless, as well as Help USA. Help USA specifically has been a provider of homeless shelters. And Ada, please let me know if you wanted to announce this. But yeah, we've been speaking about bringing potentially a legal service provider. Ada, if you want to add to that, by all means, feel free.
Now we're working on getting someone from the Legal Aid Society, but not necessarily my unit, because we represent tenants who are facing eviction, but someone maybe from the Homeless Project. But I haven't heard back, so I'll let you know once they confirm.
So,
a point of clarification about the eviction moratorium. Can everybody hear me? Because I think my internet keeps freezing. You can hear me? Okay, perfect. If I have to go off camera, I'll do that to make it easier. So I'm excited, yes, that there's some sort of moratorium until the end of the year. A point of clarification for anybody who's watching this or who is advising someone who might be who's in an eviction proceeding or something, is that what the governor did was extend the Tenant Safe Harbor Act, not necessarily the moratorium as it existed until today. The one that expired today was like automatic. Tenants didn't really have to do anything. The Tenant Safe Harbor Act protects tenants who have been financially impacted by COVID, but you have to raise it as an affirmative defense. So that means you have to already be in a proceeding. You have to raise it and you have to demonstrate that you qualify. And ultimately, it is up to judicial discretion. But if you can demonstrate you've been impacted by COVID, then that defense is available to you and you are protected against eviction until the end of the year, because that's what the governor extended it to. But it's just a little bit different because I think we've been hearing a lot about moratoriums, and as they existed from the beginning of the pandemic through October 1st has been very different than what we're looking at now. So I think it's important for anybody who's paying attention to this to be like, okay, it's slightly different. And how can a tenant be able to bring this up if they're facing some sort of eviction proceeding? The second point about the Tenant Safe Harbor Act, which maybe a lot of people are not familiar with, is that while it protects you from being evicted, it does not take away your obligation to pay rent. So the landlord can still obtain what is known as a money judgment. And that could have some severe consequences for people. I think, Aria, you mentioned this last time in our last committee meeting, but just again, because we might have people tuning in who didn't see the last one, is that a money judgment, of course, could affect your credit score. It could also impact your ability to obtain other housing if you're trying to move out. So some real consequences. You're welcome to call 311 if you need to speak to an attorney. There is a housing hotline that is staffed by attorneys and staff members of various legal service providers throughout the city. So you could just call in. If you want to speak to a Legal Aid Society, we're on Tuesdays.
Edit question.
Yes.
So the last year's new rent laws said a landlord can't blacklist a tenant. Does that still apply in this case?
Yeah, the landlord can't technically blacklist a tenant. That is correct, but that could still, a money judgment could still affect your credit score. So so that in a way could impact you. And there's really no way, sometimes we have laws and then I wonder, well, how are you actually enforcing this and making sure that landlords are not actually using information against tenants? And I don't think we have a clear answer on that yet.
Thank you.
So much again, Ada. You know how much I appreciate it.
Okay. I don't mean to overset. This is just like my little thing. That's what I do.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, can't say enough about how much I appreciate LAS in the middle of all the cases that was taken on back in the strange days of TSU. But yeah, thank you again so much. So with that, is there any old business that folks want to bring up? And actually, I'll also just ask if perhaps members from the public, Janet or Danny.
In regards to one of the things in our budget request is in relation to the community land trust. And this is just an example where we voted near unanimously in support of the creation of a community land trust in our district, but yet this board and specifically the chairs have not done anything to advocate for that resolution. And there's other resolutions where the same have happened. One of them, I've spent a few months trying to bring it to the forefront to make sure that it finally got sent out to the electeds. But in the cases of others that have been sent to the electeds, there's been no advocacy. And I think we need to review what outstanding resolutions we have that fall into that bracket.
Is there perhaps any way that you feel might essentially aid in that effort of trying to get really the kind of local support for community land bank? How would you like? What would you think would probably be?
We are members of our community have won via HPD's program for community land trusts the right to be in a program where they're nurtured through the process of creating this community land trust. So I feel like there's already community buy-in. There's a lot of discussion that has been had about it. The agency is connected with that group within our community. Our board voted. So more than anything, and what I'm referencing is the fact that just like in the case of 2110 Amsterdam and 21 Arden, where were it not for the work of Martin Collins, that would just be in the dust, in the back of our minds, and not any active action being taken for it. So really what I've been attempting to have implemented is appropriate tracking systems so that we're not dropping the ball with the work that we should be doing. And in fact, went as far as to put in an application with Microsoft for that idea that I have it accepted, only for it to get tremendous pushback from within this board. But it holds back progress.
I was actually going to say I didn't know that the Inwood Community Land Trust proposal was already approved. Did Phil? Correct me if it's still Phil. Did Phil perhaps have like a public announcement? I'd love to try and hear from him.
No, when I say as far as that group being accepted, they won. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But there was a program that HPD put out a request for proposals, I believe it was that they put out. And that group was one of the groups that won the right to be a part of that, almost like an incubator program for community land trust. So they've been going through the motions, having meetings. They, prior to us voting on it, scouted out locations within the district that might be feasible. And so, but really what I mean, and they continue to do that work. But really what I'm speaking to is what our work is as a board, which is we pass resolutions, they need to be advocated for. There needs to be followed through on the intention of those resolutions. So pretty much being a partner to the rest of the community that is doing the work, in this case specific to community land trust, but I mean in all cases, in the we spend a lot of time having the discussions, sometimes bringing other people into the fray to have the discussions with us, doing the research. I would assume that when we pass a resolution, it's not just just to go through the motions, that we actually have an expectation of some type of follow through to be happening, and that's not what we're dealing with right now.
Okay. So, okay. So I'm thinking what would be the best way then on the community boards end, because if, for instance, so we have the district manager going to cabinet meetings, would we like to perhaps then discuss that with the district manager, how he can present, or really just ask about what's happening with that funding that might have been allocated for community land trust? Is that maybe one way in which you'd like to try and advocate for that?
I wasn't saying that in our budget ranking that this needs to be taken off. We do need to advocate for funding specific to the building of community land trust, or the usage of lands or buildings in our district in order to implement community land trust. What I mean is, so for instance, the resolution was voted on, I think at this point it's probably like 2 years or 3 years now. But what is not happening is that from this board, our chair, which it is the chair's charge to be in the know of what these things are, like in the case of the 2 buildings, for instance, and to say, okay, we voted on this, it went forward to the elected officials, what's the status? Where are we with it now? Is there follow through? Is the funding there? There needs to be continued advocacy for those matters. So in the case of the community land trust, there needs to be continued advocacy in support of the fact that we voted on it, first of all, but also that we have an entity within our district that has been pushing for community land trust and doing the work of seeking out partners, educating others in the district. But CB12 has not continued their work to make sure that the resolution we put forward is supported.
Gotcha. Okay. And yeah, sorry if it came off as if I was mentioning taking it off the priorities list. I was just trying to ask what you felt might be more helpful. And if I'm understanding, so maybe it might be great to try and set up at some point in the year a meeting where we can we can invite the council member to come to a meeting, or perhaps even like a representative from the office, so that we can speak to them about this.
Yeah. And Mark Levine has been a part of some of those conversations in the past. But I think a definite, I mean, I work in the field of technology. So for me, what that would look like for our board is to have an actual system that isn't just paperwork, where when a resolution is passed, it can just disappear into the archives and nothing be done. That's more what I mean, and I don't know, maybe that's something that we need to be putting in our budget rankings. I don't think that it's necessary. It's probably something that can be achieved with our own budget. But some kind of work needs to be done to hold the office accountable and hold the other members of the board that have responsibilities to carry these things through, to make sure that at all times, not just for any of these items, but for all future items as well, that the ball cannot be dropped with the work that's being done.
Well, Aisha, I think that at some degree, we as members have to remind the office, maybe on a regular basis, about those resolutions or items that need to be push through. I mean,
I understand the spirit of what you're saying. I completely disagree. No corporation is functioning the way that CB12 is functioning right now, and it's really not difficult. It's very system. It really just takes the will to want to have a board that functions in that way. And I don't think that it's hard, because what if all of us are not here next year? Who's to remind the office? The office should function, period.
I don't disagree with you, but I'm saying that for right now, maybe the next thing to do is to keep reminding the office, hey, what's happened with XYZ? Where are we in that process?
Yeah.
And you know, because maybe we'll have to do it like on a monthly basis. I don't know.
And to be honest, that for me, that process has not been fun for me. That process is part of the toxicity that I've experienced in this board, having to be one of the people very regularly saying, hey, what's happening with this? Why is this not happening this way? Aren't we supposed to be doing X, Y, Z? And it becomes a matter of contention, whether it's that people don't want to be reminded that they're not doing their job, whether they are taking a personal issue or have an agenda in relation to some of the topics. But that shouldn't be allowed to happen.
Right, but I again, I agree with you, but by not saying anything, then it's like kind of,
oh yeah,
get forgotten. So
yeah,
and we all people, we all forget one way or another. I get it. The office, this is their job, but you know, we all forget. But continue reminding the office of those resolutions or issues that need to be addressed is the way to go. And you know, at some point, if they don't, you know,
no, I honestly, I think that it, especially considering the amount of antagonism that I've experienced in relation to many of these things, I think that we're past that. I think that where we are is that it's time for the board's office to function. Honestly, this type of work is something that if it were functioning the way that it, in my experience, this is something people would get fired for. Honestly,
I get it, but we're going back to you
to
want to build some sort of a history, reminding the X about Z about 50 times and those dates and so forth. So and so some of it you know, some of it is like people forget, and some of it they may be like neglected. I don't know, but we have to continue to remind them all the time.
I think that is definitely neglect. Sure. Do people just forget things sometimes? Yeah, but should they be able to forget these things? Absolutely not. There should be a system that reminds people of what is outstanding, is really what it is. And I haven't had a problem saying, hey, I see that this is not done, missing, etc., but it hasn't been fun. The response that I've received is not fun, which is why I don't think it should be anyone's specific responsibility to do what can just be done by a system.
Just make sure that if you say it in a meeting and it's not in the minutes, then you have to make, you know, you have to point that out, that it's something was not in the minutes.
Which is also the reason why I proposed and created a partnership. It only needed approval for all of the minutes to be done via transcript by trained stenographers. And I got pushed back for that as well. But that is one of the reasons why I suggested that, because oftentimes things are left out of the minutes.
Okay. I mean,
So just going to the ask as well about the minutes this month. So last month I had them submitted for September. I actually wanted to ask, would anyone be willing to do now the minutes for October?
I'm sorry, I can't do any minutes.
Yeah, no.
I'm the secretary, so it's like.
I completely understand, OC. So we're all the way at least we've tried to do in the past is that we're splitting it up so that each month we can take this on. You know, we only have 10 months. We have 7 members here, so it's roughly, you know, about 2 times that anyone might be doing this. Would anyone be able to take on October? If not, I can try and create a list and just assign it throughout the rest of the year.
Ariel, what would be the deadline to, when would you need it by? Just kind of thinking about everything else I got going on.
No.
Before the general meeting.
I would say probably the 15th.
The 15th?
So about 2 weeks from today.
Okay, so I'll just put myself forward for October then.
Okay. Thank you, Maria. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And Adia, you could put me down for November if you want to just have that done already.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And if there's specific time periods that, just throughout the year in general, that it tends to be easier, I'm always happy to try and accommodate that. All right. So not to leave anybody else the opportunity. If that is everything that's going to be going for tonight, I will then call the meeting to a close. Can I get a second? Seeing a second?
Bruce, second.
Perfect. So, thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Mariel.
Hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
You
Take
too.
care.
Happy fall. See you in
Thank
November.
you. Happy.
Good
Good
night.
evening, everyone. Bye.
Good night, all.